The problem with Lord Mandelson is not just that there's questions outstanding, but his attitude to people who are asking those questions. When those questions can be asked of the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, and continue to be asked whether they're answered or not, then I don't think one should be surprised that Peter Mandelson gets asked the same sort of questions. And you know, Peter Mandelson's foray into diplomacy, or rather the spectacular absence of it, Britain's freshly minted ambassador to the United States, a man who's made a career out of slipping through the cracks of a scandal with a grin and a well-tailored suit, recently provided us with a textbook case of what not to say when confronted with awkward cases. And it was aboard a train, rather than the back seat of Lord Palumbo's Bentley, that Mandelson found himself grappling with the journalist's equivalent of a dentist wielding a particularly sharp drill, and the subject his past association with Jeffrey Epstein, the now notorious financier, socialite, convicted sex trafficker, whose name can silence even the most loquacious of public figures, and silence, let's be clear, would have been a more appropriate response. Instead, Mandelson, in a moment of great oratorical genius, opted for a robust, forthright, and highly undiplomatic, you can all F off, okay? Except he didn't stop with the acronym. He continued and used the word. And in fact, I was looking at a book earlier today called The Things They Carried or something by Tim, I can't remember what the name was. And I was going through this with a student, and the stuff is littered. The book's littered with foul language, and I tried avoiding it, and the student thought it was very funny. But the bottom line is, this isn't the sort of language that you use in diplomacy. Now, for a man who's built a career on silky elocution, described by a former US president like George W. Bush's silver tongue, this was a somewhat unexpected deviation. Bush, it appears, was unacquainted with the rather more industrial vocabulary that surfaced when Mandelson's past friendships come under scrutiny. Let's not be too quick to judge, after all. The man who once opined that being intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich surely didn't expect his own past acquaintances to become an indelible stain on his reputation. But Mandelson's relationship with Epstein is well documented, whether through J.P. Morgan internal reports, birthday gatherings at Epstein's Paris residence, or those quaint email exchanges as late as 2012. And yet, despite these records, Mandelson maintains a position of regret, though crucially not quite accountability. I regret ever meeting him, he assures us, before swiftly reminding the press that this is, in his view, an FT obsession. FT, is that another rude expression? One might ask, does the Financial Times have an unhealthy fixation on the past connections of Britain's representatives to America? Or is this simply a case of a journalist doing their job, much to the chagrin of the man who would rather discuss his transformation from anti-Trump progressive to a pragmatic, pro-market, not quite a wokey-cokey statesman? You see, Mandelson now insists that the incoming Trump administration will find him most agreeable, a man who is, despite all assumptions, pro-business and not an ultra-liberal ideologue. Quite the turnaround for a man who once referred to Trump as a danger to the world. I mean, what do you believe about this Mandelson man? Does he just say whatever he thinks people want to hear? Or does he actually have a grain of authenticity or truth coming out of his mouth? What is so special about his tongue that George W. Bush should praise it? What does Peter Mandelson's tongue do that other tongues can't do? And his attempts to charm the American right may be somewhat overshadowed by the enthusiastic contributions of Trump's advisers, one of whom memorably labelled Mandelson an absolute moron. This, Mandelson assures us, was nothing more than an intoxicated musing from an overzealous aide at a raucous inauguration event, something akin to young minds ploughing their own furrow on a sea of too much inauguration alcohol. A lot of tonguing gone on there as well. which incidentally is a phrase so bizarre it could only have been composed by a man who spent years bending language to his will, licking it into shape. More tonguing. But back to the matter of hand. What does all this tell us about the state of diplomacy, accountability, and indeed Britain's political class, if Mandelson is all we've got to offer? Firstly, it reaffirms the art of dodging difficult questions remains alive and well, and Mandelson may have spent decades perfecting the art of the non-answer, but even he was caught off guard by the level of persistence displayed here. The shock, the arrogance of somebody who would dare ask him about Epstein. Secondly, it demonstrates that the veneer of refinement and statesmanship that Peter Mandelson tries to project cracks under the right amount of pressure, revealing something far less polished beneath. The fecal undercurrent of bad language. Thirdly, it raises questions about how figures are continuously recycled into positions of immense influence or effluence, despite their baggage being heavier than the transatlantic flight's luggage allowance. So Keir Starmer, when pressed on whether it was wise to entrust Mandelson with such a sensitive diplomatic job, opted for the time-honoured response of citing experience. Lord Mandelson's experience speaks for itself. Yes, it does. FT, a Downing Street spokesperson, has said this. Lord Mandelson's experience speaks for itself. Certainly does. But whether that experience is in diplomacy or in self-preservation or simply the use of inappropriate language remains open to interpretation. So as Mandelson embarks upon his latest reinvention, one that requires charm, restraint, and an ability to navigate the often frosty waters of UK-US relations, one cannot help but wonder whether his first major test as ambassador has already been an unqualified failure, an FT failure. Telling the press to FT off is, after all, an unusual opening gambit in international relations. FTU. But then again, Mandelson has always played by his own set of rules, preferring to orchestrate political theatre rather than adhere to conventional diplomacy. Wouldn't it be fun if he was replaced almost immediately? And so, we find ourselves pondering this wisdom of his appointment. For in an era where statesmanship is, one would hope, built on trust and credibility, diplomatic experience, the return of the Dark Prince of New Labour swearing at journalists, rewriting his political creed on the fly, raises the rather pressing question, is this really the best we've got? FT. One thing is certain, however. When the time comes for Peter Mandelson to navigate Washington's corridors of power, we may find them slightly less forgiving than the lavishly upholstered back seat of Lord Palumbo's Bentley.